Welcome to day 2 of the sessions here at Authenticate. This room for the rest of the day is going to be hosting the public sector track. We've got a great lineup of speakers, many from the federal government. We've got somebody from the state of Michigan as well talking about passkeys, and a number of folks who are sort of in and around the public sector ecosystem. I'm Jeremy Grant, along with my colleague Zach Martin from Venable, will be your moderators for this session track. We're going to try and keep things very tight on pace because we got people virtually. To that point, if you have questions, please submit them through the app, and then we will, through all of the sessions, basically pull things off the app and ask them to the extent we have time. So without any further delay, let me give you the fireside chat that long awaited between Zach and Andy on the discussion about NIST Special Pub 863-4 and all things digital identity. Thanks.
Thanks, Jeremy. Andy, thanks for joining me today.
Happy to be here. I hope people left their rotten vegetables outside.
I think we had somebody searching at the back end, so I think we should be fine. So, also, don't mean to be rude by having my phone out. It's just I need to be monitoring the online for any questions coming in, so I'll be checking that periodically. But again, Andy, thanks for joining us today. Wanted to kick off by, comments closed for 63-4 last week. Can you give us any insight into how many comments you all received and where they were focused from?
Yeah, we're still going through them, but we got over 2,000 comments from more than 100 different organizations and individuals. That was after the first public comment period where we had, in that case, it was about 4,000 comments that came in. So there's been a great deal of, public input in these guidelines. As I said, we're still looking through the new comments that came in. I think, we did start to see some themes. It pains me to say this, but one of the biggest themes was we got a lot of comments on passwords. And one of the changes that we made was, we didn't actually make changes in the second public draft, but we still only specify 8-character minimum password lengths, which was controversial. There's nothing more soul-crushing than adjudicating comments on password length and password policies. On the one hand, I get it. There's a lot of systems out there that unfortunately still use passwords, including a lot of systems that really shouldn't be. So we have to, look at those obviously, but at the same time, there's only so much you can do there. So we would much rather be spending our time looking at things like phishing-resistant authenticators and passkeys. And of course, that was another area where we've received a number of comments. Many of them targeted at the new guidelines that we have in the draft and as the part of the supplement covering syncable authenticators like passkeys. So we have guidelines now on both the sync fabrics for sharing and syncing those keys, as well as for the relying parties, whether they be public-facing relying parties or enterprises using passkeys. So we got a lot of comments on that, including questions around things like how does attestation fit in, which is still an evolving subject here. As many of you know, 863 is not just about authentication. So the volume A is about identity proofing. So a lot of questions around some of the different evidence types that we have there. Volume C covers federation, and there we added new requirements, separating out the guidelines for what we call general purpose IDPs, traditional federation using things like OpenID Connect or SAML, from the emerging area of like wallets and verifiable credentials. So we had a lot of comments on that, both a lot of support for that, as well as a lot of areas where they'd like, people had questions, clarifications, or suggestions.
And you talked about syncable authenticators, and like earlier this year, NIST released a supplement to 63.3b about enabling syncable authenticators. Now, there's still some discussion in the market among possibly some people that are in the room today. I can't really see out there because the lights are very bright. But some people are saying that syncable authenticators are not multi-factor authentication, that they're single-factor cryptographic authenticators. How do you feel about this comment? How do you feel because when the supplement came out, there were a few folks that were just kind of like, I don't think this is a good idea. I don't think sync passkeys are multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, I've heard this, and this is, I mean, there's been variations of this that have come up over the years, even before the days of FIDO. Within the supplement and within 63B and with the revised draft, I mean, we're very clear that, we consider passkeys that are presented through a flow that includes user verification. We consider those multi-factor authentication. I think when that topic comes up, like some of the folks bringing that up, like there's other underlying concerns that are kind of driving that. It might be questions around, what is the security of the sync fabrics used to sync those keys. That's obviously a very important issue. Other issues around, maybe what they're really worried about is compliance. How do you know that an authenticator that a user is bringing in to a flow? How do you know the characteristics and properties of all that authenticator? So I agree that there's, that it's important. I think it's important to tease those issues out. I don't think the, is it multi-factor or not is really the right question there. I think it's understanding kind of what those concerns are and what some of the different approaches for deciding whether that's something that you really need strong assurance for, and if so, what can you do as an organization to to get the level of trust that you need. So, within both 63B and the supplement, we don't think that you need to request a second factor if you're in a flow where user verification is supplied. But due to some of those other considerations that come up, I can understand why some RPs might feel the need to request an additional factor on top of the passkey. Because of some of these other questions and visibility around what's being used.
Yep. Great. FIDO's been referenced in OMB guidance, CISA guidance. About a little bit more than a year ago, we the FIDO Alliance put out a paper from the U.S. Government Deployment Working Group about trying to encourage FIDO adoption in the U.S. government. We feel that uptake has still not been, we have champions within the government, but there still has not been that mass adoption.
The government moving slowly? I'm shocked.
It's surprising to everybody in this room, I'm sure. But from your perspective, what do you think needs to be done to enable greater FIDO passkey adoption within the U.S. government?
Yeah, I think that's tough because I don't think there's any one single reason that leads to that. I think when you look at how agencies look at the IT systems that agencies have and the way that they deploy and manage and update those systems. We have a lot of legacy debt, and that, I think, makes it sometimes difficult to accommodate new technologies. We also have, we're not always responsible for building or maintaining our own IT systems. We're often contracting through, either developers for GOT systems or to, contract for, commercial services. So I think that also leads to challenges and sometimes delays in terms of being able to deploy, new technologies. I also think it's important to kind of differentiate between like the public-facing, citizen, oriented use cases versus the enterprise use cases. I think those legacy issues and IT system issues apply in both cases. But on the enterprise, we're in a little bit of a different situation in that we have invested a lot in the deployment and use of the personal identity verification card standards that use PKI. So, we already benefit in a lot of our systems to have a phishing-resistant authentication option. But I will also say over time, we certainly see that not all systems are PKI aware, and that there's great benefit, even in the enterprise case, to being able to, make use of, technologies like passkeys for the federal enterprise case. So, we have been working on, both updating the NIST standards for things like the PIV standards and guidelines to better accommodate use of things like FIDO and passkeys. I think you also see coming out from from, say, the White House and the Office of Management and Budget, some other clear policies around, making it clear to agencies that they're able to, pilot and adopt those other technologies alongside the PKI credentials on PIV as well. But it can be slow going with the need to also, it's not just about accommodating or adopting that authenticator. It's often then needing to modernize the entire, ID management stack and the single sign-on stack. So that can take time. That's a cost issue. It's a cost issue sometimes with the authenticators themselves for us to adopt. So again, there's no single thing that is really responsible for that.
Yep, completely. Well, and even within our group, we're contemplating, it's like, which use cases do we push more? Do we push the consumer, citizen, the government, or do we push the enterprise? Do we do both at the same time? So we're just, that's even a challenge for the group itself. So you mentioned 63C earlier, and you all did a lot of work. You added a lot of content to 63C around wallets. How do you, with mobile driver's license, verifiable credentials becoming more and more, prevalent. Like they're popping up more. Prevalent might be a little bit of an overstatement. How do you see those credentials and passkeys and digital wallets all kind of working together in the future?
Yeah, it is a rapidly emerging area, right? There's more than 10 states now issuing, mobile driver's licenses, and I think another about 30 that are somewhere in the process. So yeah, we're really excited for the value that, verifiable credentials like MDocs can bring to, improving identity online. Ultimately, things like verifiable credentials and MDLs, they're about communicating attributes. So that's largely driven in the, what you need in the identity proofing process. I think it's a very natural and probably preferable adoption path for these things to work together is, using, MDLs that can communicate attributes in the enrollment and identity proofing process, and then moving to, something that's more tailored for authentication, like passkeys, for subsequent access to that account. Within 63C, we try to accommodate a really wide variety of use cases with, while also being, trying to prepare for what the future may hold. And I honestly don't know where, what we're likely to see in terms of the adoption of verifiable credentials, particularly outside the government space. So I think there will be some use cases where, you might see verifiable credentials issued for a particular application or community that's used both, for sort of that login and authentication flow. But really, I think, we should mostly be targeting things like the government-issued, verifiable credentials and MDLs for the proofing flows.
Great. And please, for those online, please submit your questions to the app. I have one question in the pipeline that I'll get to here in a second. But, Andy, it's like going back to the David Letterman top 10 list. I'm not going to ask you for the top 10 things that you would like to see FIDO do to improve authentication. But is there 2 or 3 things that you would like to see FIDO focused on to improve authentication?
Yeah. So, I think... again, we're really excited for these, now new options for bringing phishing resistance to the masses. And I think things like passkeys have a tremendous value across a very wide range of use cases. And I think we have a good story to tell for, some citizen or consumer-oriented use cases with passkeys, and I think there's also a very good story to tell with some of the enterprise attestation options for being able to use passkeys in enterprise environments. I do think there is still a little bit of a hole when it comes to explaining how to use them in higher assurance use cases, where the RPs may either want to see additional visibility or additional signals to get a view on the risks. I think part of that is might be, bringing the community together to really talk about what the risks are, what properties you get, to decide what the, true requirements are, but then also some of that may be, expanding, specifications in different ways to provide some greater visibility. And of course, there's ongoing work on that, and I think that's important to continue.
All right, we have a question from the app, and if anybody else has questions in the room, please please use the microphone in the aisle.
One other thing that I'll say,
sorry.
too, is I think it's important to also have a view to the future. So my role at NIST includes not just digital identity, but also cryptography standards. And as many of you know, the threat of quantum computers can bring to the public key crypto systems that we use and things like FIDO. So, at NIST, we recently released some of the first post-quantum cryptography standards for signatures and key establishment. I think it's going to be important for all standards organizations, FIDO included, to be looking at, what they have, how they use cryptography, and how their technologies will migrate to post-quantum schemes. And there as well, I think Monty Weissman might be in the audience right now, who's leading, yes, in the second row, leading a group here within FIDO to start to, identify where the cryptography is being used and lay out that strategy for migrating to quantum-resistant algorithms. So I think that's also very important work going on.
Great. All right, from online, the concept of synced passkeys has challenged perceptions of what actually constitutes MFA. Is there a concept of MFA with factors of known, have, are, becoming outdated with a shift to concern about the overall security of flows?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair comment. I think we heard that last night during the keynotes, that perhaps this concept of multi-factor authentication isn't aging well. I mean, really, we should be looking at this more from a a threat-based perspective, and what we see, right, is the threat of things like phishing attacks are really what's dominating, and I think that's probably more important to focus on actually than this notion of whether something is single factor or multi-factor.
And does NIST take a position on whether there should be a single identity provider for all citizen-facing government services, or whether each agency should provision their own identity? I think I can know the answer to this one, but go ahead.
We do not. But I mean, I will say, I think one of the overarching themes that I hope people take away from 863 is that we think lots of options are very important. I think that's the best way to accommodate the very wide constituency that we serve within the government, and so different processes, different providers, I think is I think very important to have.
Well, and last week you all released the attribute validation NISTer that talks about how different government services can validate attributes of individuals for identity proofing services. So that was just released last week. Questions from the crowd? We've gone through the app. Christina, come on, I know you have some questions.
Get your signs up.
All right, I'm Christina, and hello. So my favorite, first off, I absolutely love what you guys are doing. I wrote you some signs. This one says, "Make NIST great again," because I know that you guys have been doing so much with so little. So thank you. But I have another sign, which is, you people, you must pull apart AL2. In B, you have anywhere from OTP all the way to phishing resistance, so a passkey as an AL2. In C, you specifically call out phishing resistance authenticator as a must, which means you recognize that phishing resistant is something that's different than an OTP, and that means that the assurance level is higher. So pull it apart, please.
I mean, your point is well taken that you're right. AL2 currently covers a very wide range of multi-factor authentication techniques offering very different security properties, from phishable OTP over SMS to phishing-resistant syncable passkeys. I think the challenge that we continue to have there is just there's, the structure of 863 is built around 3 assurance levels. We have essentially, AAL1 being the low assurance case of including password-only authentication, AAL3 being the very high assurance hardware-based cryptographic authentication with things like device-bound passkeys and PIV, which leaves then AAL2 to be very wide.
But you could do AAL0, like you do IAL0.
The suggestion was we could do AAL0, essentially creating 4 levels.
IAL0 is not really a thing.
It is a thing. It's a thing that's not.
So this has obviously been a discussion that's been going on for quite some time, with a lot of strong opinions on both sides.
Yeah, we've been talking about splitting AAL2 into phishing resistant and non-phishing resistant for AAL2.5. Is that the
AAL2 plus was a. I think that is perhaps the least favored option that's been proposed. Sorry, Jeremy.
Lisa?
Yeah. Can we talk about the new NIST about the attribute exchange and how that relates into 863?
Yeah, so I mean, I think another common theme that we've seen with the 863 suite is around identity proofing. So really, I think some of the biggest challenges that we face with digital identity is on the identity verification and identity proofing side, as opposed to the authentication side. The topic of part of the identity proofing process involves verifying personal attributes to see that somebody is, that a real person exists with those attributes and that the attributes being presented are correct and accurate. We've seen challenges with the availability of some of the data sources there, either some groups not always being able to be identified through those, or there being perhaps disparate impacts to different groups based on if they're like thin file, if they don't have that much of a digital footprint in say credit records. So for a long time there's been a thought that government sources of attributes could be a huge benefit to improving both the accuracy and kind of availability and access for those services. So that NIST IR was really intended as a way for us to kind of look at the ecosystem, look at the standards being used, look at common architectures being used, particularly by some existing government systems, and sort of lay out both how we see things currently and how things could work, particularly as we look to the future with things like verifiable credentials.
Grant?
Yeah. So first of all, how does it feel to be the person where you get to be the keeper of the length of the password? But
I hate it.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought. Me too. But I did get a laugh out of all the press that was written about all the password complexity stuff. So my question is, as authentication flows have gotten more and more complicated over the years, I mean, we see, endless OAuth flows and what's a session versus what's federation, and it just gets more and more complicated as people try and make things work in more and more scenarios. 863 has gotten complicated as well, and I think it's built a pretty advanced model of how one interacts with the digital system to capture all that complexity. But the complexity keeps growing, the authentication flows keep getting more and more complicated. We keep having UX research optimizing every last redirect out to create yet more complexity. The OAuth people are increasingly creative. How do you think about sort of what is the right amount of that complexity to bring into 863 as it continues to evolve versus try and keep a sort of a simple model of, you sign into a session and the session is valid for 30 minutes and then it expires and then you go back. Maybe you could just share with the group a little bit about how you try and manage the complexity of the problem and distill it into a document.
And you have a minute, sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important that the guidelines that we have, both in things like in B for authentication and C for federation, be sort of generic to different technology, just different protocols. So what I would really like to be able to do is strike this balance where we're clear about what security properties need to be established, and then leave it to both industry groups like FIDO to identify like the underlying specifications and standards for how the authentication protocols work, or the OpenID Foundation for profiles of federation protocols. Like, leave some of those details there. I think there's also a role for NIST to play with expanding our implementation guidance to dig into some of these more details in areas where where it's needed, or where there's ambiguity in the guidance, or how they should be implemented.
Wow, that was right on time. That was very.
We've got this nice timer.
Well, Andy, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all for attending the session. We'll be back in 5 minutes with Tom Clancy.